Have you ever taken the time to examine the code of ethics and how it affects your day-to-day practice of real estate?
Good evening, Mr.
Good
Scales.
evening. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for the opportunity.
No problem.
Who can I thank for this opportunity?
Well, we saw a sign on a house that sold around the block, and we wanted to get a good realtor with local knowledge. So we had to fire our last realtor, Bob Wessel. And the guy was horrible, terrible. All he did was just stick a sign in the yard and disappear. Never saw him.
I'm so sorry you had a bad experience, but I'm glad you called me. I've sold several homes in this neighborhood. This is my area of expertise.
All right, well, do you know Bob? I mean, we heard he was known in the realtor community as a real, like, a snake in the grass type of guy.
Sounds like you had a lot of issues with Bob. Yeah. What I'd like to focus on during our time is what I can do to get your home sold.
Okay.
Why don't you walk me through your home and show me some of its best features?
Sure.
Well, now that I've had a chance to see your home, let's look at homes similar to yours that have sold in the last few months.
Okay.
Okay, here are 3 homes in your neighborhood that have closed within the last 4 months.
Ooh, do we have to use all of those? I mean, I know at least one was a foreclosure, and there were homes that sold last year for much closer to the price that we want to list for.
Well, it's important that we stay close to your home in proximity, size, and condition when selecting homes that are comparable. Most appraisers won't make an adjustment based solely on the fact that a home was a foreclosure. Okay. A lot of times those homes are in disrepair. The condition would be a more likely reason to see an adjustment. Let me show you how that works.
I understand how you come up with your recommended price, but we would still like to test the market for the first couple of weeks at our price.
Mr. Scales, the truth is you'll get the most showings on your home in the first 2 to 3 weeks. If we start out high, you could lose the perfect buyer. Most buyers won't come back after price reductions, and multiple price reductions can have a really negative impact on the perception of your home.
Well, all right, well, if we go with a lower list price, then if you don't mind, we're gonna need you to work with us a little bit on your commission. Now, you said your company charges a minimum of X% when we spoke on the phone. Now, we have friends who told us that you guys charge less. So, I mean, so if we work something out, could you do it for less?
I don't blame you for trying to get the best deal that you can. Our company charges the commission we do, though, because we're confident that the marketing plan and full-time excellent customer service is worth the fee. Other companies charge based on what they believe is the best price for their business model. But in fact, there is no set price. It's important that you understand how the money you spend is divided out. My broker collects the entire commission, and then we offer a percentage of that to the brokerage firm that sells your house. My broker and the broker for the other company will then split their side with the agent working for the buyer or seller. So you see, there are at least 4 people involved in that scenario.
So if you sell our home yourself, then you get paid twice as much?
When we don't have a cooperating agent, the listing and selling fees stay with one company.
If I agree to pay you your rate, and will you reduce your fee if you bring the buyer and sell our home?
That's called a variable commission. I am allowed legally and ethically to make that kind of deal. I need my broker's permission to negotiate fees that may affect her income, but in this case, I'm willing to make up the difference if she doesn't agree. So, if you'll list with me tonight, I'll charge a lesser amount if I personally bring the buyer that purchases your home.
I can work with that. Good deal.
Next, we'll go over some office policies that you'll want to be aware of. We'll present all offers that come in, unless you instruct us not to. For example, if you want all offers in writing, we can make a note on your listing agreement that says you want verbal offers withheld. We'll comply with all fair housing regulations, and we won't discriminate against any party. Our office requires sellers to fill out a disclosure form that covers all maintenance and repairs that you've had during your ownership. Buyers will want to see it, and it protects you.
We had a roof leak over the sunroom, but I sprayed it for mold, I took care of it, and painted over it. I mean, we just want to let the buyer's inspection see what they discover.
Ooh, roof leaks can be pretty messy. Did you have a professional take a look at it?
No. I mean, we figured we can keep the expenses down by doing it ourselves.
Mr. Scales, this is the kind of thing that can really come back and bite you. It's my job to make sure that we're in compliance with disclosure items like this for your protection and mine. Ideally, you should have it properly repaired prior to listing the home.
I just don't know if we have the cash to do that right now.
Well, another option is to disclose the problem up front. That way the buyer can go into the deal knowing what they may need to budget for. Now understand that the offer will typically be for less than it would cost you to do the repair. A buyer is going to factor in their inconvenience.
Well, let me talk to my wife and let me see if we can find a way to take care of this right now.
That sounds great. I'll leave the disclosure with you to fill out.
And we haven't talked about the kind of marketing you'll do for us. Will you run ads in the real estate magazines?
Well, since roughly just 4% of all sales can be tied to print ads, I won't spend a lot of time or money on print. Usually the best return for print is an open house. I'd like to schedule one for next weekend. Tell me some of the features that you like best about your home, okay? So I can highlight them.
All right, well, we want our home listed as a waterfront property. That way we can get more people interested in coming in to see how beautiful it is in here.
I didn't realize you were on the water. I mean, you know, technically for us to call this waterfront, the lot needs to be touching the water.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can see the water from our porch. You just have to lean over the edge a little. That's close enough, right?
We might be able to market it as water view then. Why don't we take a look at that view, and then we'll decide what makes the most sense.
All right.
Article 1 states that realtors pledge to protect and promote the interests of their client. If you were the consumer, how would you want to be treated? What level of service and professionalism should you expect from a realtor? Lauren followed the requirements of the code to the T. She explained her office policies, how she cooperates with other brokers, and even how much she compensates them. She also took time to educate her seller. She told him about the role other brokers play in the transaction. For example, even though the buyer's agent is being compensated by the listing broker, the buyer's agent may still represent the interest of the buyer in the transaction. Did you notice that Lauren did not try to mislead the homeowner on the fair market value of his property to secure the listing? The homeowner was given a fair market value estimate and was able to make an informed decision. He could wait for the value of the property to go up before he lists his property or sign a listing agreement to put his property on the market right away. We don't always know how the homeowner is going to react to the cold, hard facts when it comes to the value of the property. Sometimes we lose the opportunity to take a listing because the seller has a change of heart over price. Even if you are not able to take the listing, you have demonstrated you are a real estate professional the homeowners can trust. Who knows? He may call you to list his property in the future, and better yet, recommend you to friends and neighbors. It's simply good business. And as we all know, a good business reputation generates leads and future business. When you think about it, from the moment you take the listing, negotiate the deal, all the way to submitting the offer, the Code of Ethics is your guide through the entire process.
Do you realize that parts of the Code of Ethics were written to protect the consumer from himself or herself? When a seller is tempted to accept a second offer after he has already signed a contract with the first buyer, as realtors, we have an obligation to inform the seller they may encounter repercussions from their decision and should seek legal advice.
Article 1 also says that a realtor must present all offers to the seller unless the seller instructs otherwise. I'll tell you, there are times when I wonder if my offer ever gets presented at all. Some of the listing sales associates I've encountered seem to be making decisions for the seller without the seller's consent.
That could be supposition on the part of the cooperating firm. We don't know what instructions were given to the listing sales associate because we weren't there for the discussion. Remember, if you file an ethics complaint, the burden is on you to prove your offer was not presented to the seller.
Here's a tip. The MLS rules state that as a participant, you have the right to be present for the presentation of the offer, unless the seller otherwise instructs his or her broker that they do not want you present.
Now, what if the seller asks for a pre-qualification letter before the offer is submitted and the listing sales associate complies with the seller's request? Is that a violation of the code which states that you must submit all offers? Here's an example. Cooperating broker Fred is upset because the listing broker Janet refused to submit his offer without showing proof that the buyer is pre-qualified to purchase the property. The seller is adamant that she does not want to see offers unless the buyer is pre-qualified. Standard of Practice 1-7 says, "The listing sales associate shall present all offers and, therefore, he is required to submit the offer with or without the proof the buyer is pre-qualified." Janet explained to Fred that her seller did not want to waste her time looking at offers from unqualified buyers. Regardless, Fred felt Janet was in violation of Article 1, Standard of Practice 1-7. Is this a possible violation of the Code of Ethics based on the face of the complaint? What do you think? The answer is no. The listing sales associate was acting on the instructions of her client.
Take a moment and put your consumer hat back on. Your job is to help sellers move on, buyers move in, landlords profit from an investment, and tenants find a temporary place to land. Realtors also change the face of the business community through the sale and lease of businesses. You deal in emotions, from the joy of finding the perfect place to the disappointment of a deal gone bad. Realtors feel an adrenaline rush when they watch a buyer fall in love with a property. We all know that no two transactions are alike. You jump through hoops, deal with layers of frustration, and move heaven and earth just to witness the keys to a property exchange hands. Closing day is not just payday. It's a chance to walk away feeling pretty good about the job you did. But what happens when the new homeowner's dream turns into a nightmare?
Realtor Sue has been showing a particular property in the Riverview subdivision for months. The property is a foreclosure, and buyers instantly fall in love with it, with one exception. Every time Sue shows the property to buyers, the next-door neighbor suddenly appears to intercept the buyers before they go inside. He tells the buyers what's wrong with the property and why they should not waste their time looking at it. One buyer was ready to make an offer, but decided to go home and sleep on it. When the buyer called Sue back the next morning, he said he wouldn't have hesitated to put an offer on the property if it hadn't been for that interfering neighbor. If the neighbor is trying to run off potential buyers, what's it going to be like living next door to him? Sue worried about this. In fact, the other neighbors told her they were considered moving because of the next-door neighbor. One day, Sue got lucky and was able to show the property to buyers Ted and Marie without the next-door neighbor showing up. Like the other buyers before them, Ted and Marie couldn't wait to put in an offer. The bank was eager to sell the property and was ready to deal. In Sue's mind, she did not have to disclose the neighbor issue even though she admitted to herself she probably should have. As soon as Ted and Marie moved in, the problems began. The next-door neighbor was relentless in making the new homeowners miserable. The situation escalated to the point where a restraining order was issued to keep the neighbor off the property and away from them. When Ted and Marie found out from another neighbor about the problem Sue had showing the property to buyers, they were furious. Apparently, Sue knew all along about the next-door neighbor and never disclosed it to them. They have only been in the house for 2 months, and all they want to do now is put it back on the market and move to a peaceful neighborhood. The problem is, who's going to buy it? Fed up, Ted and Marie filed an ethics complaint citing Article 2. Is Sue in violation of the Code of Ethics?
Okay, you guys, let's figure this out. Lauren, what is a realtor's obligation according to Article 2?
Well, Article 2 falls under the category duties to clients and customers. It states that realtors shall avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts relating to the property or the transaction. It also says that realtors shall not, however, be obligated to discover latent defects in the property, to advise on matters outside the scope of their real estate license, or to disclose facts which are confidential under the scope of agency or non-agency relationships as defined by state law.
Exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of,
Pertinent fact relating to the property.
What does that mean?
Ooh, pick me. No, I was just reading about that. So let's see. In the NAR Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual, it states, and I quote, "It is no more possible to establish a black letter definition of pertinent facts as related to Article 2 than it would be to establish a procuring cause template or rule that would define with precision in every instance entitlement to compensation in an otherwise arbitrable situation. So a pertinent fact or material fact concerns the condition of the property, such as structural defects, building code violations, hidden dangerous conditions, water damage, that kind of stuff. Now, aside from the physical issues of a property, a realtor could be found in violation of Article 2 for answering a question on an assumption rather than a fact.
Ah, I get it. So if a buyer asks about a nearby construction project and the realtor assumes it's probably the new mall he's heard about, but it turns out to be a sewage treatment plant or something, the realtor could be found in violation. It would have been better for the realtor to either tell the buyer he doesn't know or find out what was actually being built next door and then disclose.
That's the idea.
So back to Sue's case. She knew about the neighbor's behavior and had a pretty good idea what living next door to the guy might be like. Is she obligated to disclose that to the buyers? The neighbor issue definitely played a role in a previous buyer's decision that the property wasn't worth purchasing. Ted and Marie's showing went smoothly, and they purchased the property totally unaware of the next door neighbor. Okay, you guys, do you think Sue concealed a pertinent fact by not disclosing the neighbor issue? What do you think? Pause the video if you want to discuss this before we give our answers.
Well, I don't think she concealed. I can certainly sympathize with the buyer, and I get that Sue had a dilemma deciding whether or not she should disclose the neighbor's bizarre behavior to her buyers. Morally, we want to tell the buyer even if it could cost us the sale. However, from an ethics perspective, I don't think Sue is under any obligation to make the disclosure. I mean, she's not an expert on human behavior, and she has no way of knowing how the neighbor would react to the new homeowners. The neighbor could move away, or the tension between the two could diminish over a period of time. Article 2 focuses on the conditions of the property, whether it is habitable, desirable in and of itself, and the ability to resell the property at a future date. Sue's situation just doesn't fit as a possible violation of the article.
Steve, what do you think? Do you agree? And what if Sue were the listing agent instead of the buyer's agent?
I do agree with Lauren, and even if Sue was the listing agent, she doesn't have to disclose. If she decided to disclose, she would have to do it with her seller's consent.
The code includes objective and enforceable ethical standards, but does not address the voluntary professional courtesies and etiquette guidelines discussed in the Pathways to Professionalism. Courtesies such as responding promptly to questions and requests for information, returning phone calls, showing courtesy and respect to everyone, along with similar guidelines for good business, are included in the Pathways to Professionalism document. For example, Realtor Paul listed 27 Greenway Street more than a year ago. The sellers have refused 4 offers despite the fact that all 4 are close to the possible market value. Paul remains diligent and continues to market the property in hopes of getting a full-price offer to move his sellers forward. Realtor Angel recently contacted Paul after showing the listing and relayed the news that her buyers love the home and plan to submit a full-price offer. Ecstatic, Paul phoned the seller to relay the good news. Angel called back that night to tell Paul that her buyers would be in her office the next day with the check and the signed offer. The next day, Angel's purchase contract did not come in. Paul called her several times and got no return call. Meantime, he had a report from the lockbox that Angel had showed the house again. Paul emailed her for an update. By the following evening, the sellers had begun calling Paul to ask about the status of the potential offer. Paul gently explained that he had not received it. The sellers told Paul to take the home off the market as they would wait out the listing agreement and relist it with another sales associate. Paul tried to explain the situation, but his words fell on deaf ears.
A week later, Angel contacted Paul and explained that her schedule had been extremely busy, but that the buyers had found an alternative property and purchased it. Angel apologized for the lack of communication, but said, "You know how this business works." Paul lost his temper and began screaming, yelling, and swearing at Angel, blaming her for his seller's withdrawal of their listing. Angel quietly hung up. Angel then filed an ethics complaint against Paul at the local Association of Realtors. Most likely, the grievance committee will dismiss it. The grievance committee is the association's version of a grand jury that conducts preliminary reviews of ethics complaints to determine if the evidence and content in the complaint support a possible violation of the code. Even if Paul yelled and swore at Angel, such unprofessional behavior is not a violation of the code of ethics. You may say it was unethical of Angel for neglecting to call Paul and cost him his listing. The actions of both realtors would fall under the jurisdiction of the Pathways to Professionalism. Although not a complete list, the Pathways to Professionalism may be supplemented to include local customs and practices. The Pathways to Professionalism reflects how we all would like everyone to act in the real estate profession. It's basically the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Let's find out what you learned in Chapter 4. Question 1, true or false? It is in your client's best interest to recommend that he offer the property way below fair market value to ensure a quick sale and a quick commission. The answer? False. Standard of Practice 1-3 clearly states that in an attempt to secure a listing, realtors shall not deliberately mislead the owner on the market value of the property. It's all about providing the seller with accurate information and letting the seller decide what the sales price will be. Question 2, true or false? Article 2 of the Code of Ethics says, realtors shall avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts relating to the property or the transactions. The answer is true. And question 3. The Code of Ethics is comprised of objective and enforceable ethical standards, but does not include professional courtesies and etiquette guidelines. What document contains a list of professional courtesies? The document is called Pathways to Professionalism.